The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all. But somehow undeniably now revolved around one, Raina Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID, or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning, and now finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. "Is this really happening?" Mia whispered beside her as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Raina gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called, not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Lane began, "today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it." Raina blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Raina Holloway. The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose, parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Raina stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself, but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. "I want to start by saying something simple," she began. "Thank you." The crowd hushed instantly. Not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone. She paused, grounding herself. "There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. "I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet." People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say, our voices matter. Raina's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest. Because I refused to accept invisibility as normal. Because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped, even the ones who once signed anonymous notes, even the ones who hadn't believed until now. As Raina walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Raina opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention, Your courage has not only inspired students but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to one student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Raina's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. Kahlil stood frozen as the security guard pointed at his math notebook, like it was a weapon. He just solved a century-old equation on a school chalkboard, and now they were accusing him of hacking. No kid from Detroit figures that out, one whispered. Cameras flashed, police arrived, and before Kahlil could explain, they reached for their cuffs. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The applause roared through Cambridge's historic halls like a storm of approval, reverberating off centuries-old walls now lit by LED spotlights and camera rigs. Inside Harvard's Maxwell Auditorium, the crowd of scholars, donors, and journalists leaned forward in anticipation, their faces bathed in intellectual glow. On the grand stage stood Dr. Clayton Merrow, America's golden boy of mathematics. Impeccably dressed in a navy blazer and red tie, he adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and smiled like a man fully aware of the legacy he was about to cement. Behind him, a chalkboard stretched 15 feet wide, filled edge to edge with layers of dense mathematical code, Greek letters, functions, chaotic loops of logic that seemed to fold in on themselves. In the center of it all sat the heart of the lecture, the Vorenstein conjecture, unsolved since 1963, feared, revered, unbreakable. Merrow turned to the audience and raised a hand for silence. This, he said, pointing to the problem behind him, is the Everest of pure mathematics. And today we climb. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Young students gasped. Elder professors nodded in solemn agreement. The moment felt historic, rehearsed, but grand. But hundreds of miles away, in a dim, damp Detroit basement, the sound of applause didn't reach. All that existed in that cracked concrete room was the scraping of a dry expo marker against the plastic film of a battered whiteboard. Kahlil Darnell, 12 years old, and barefoot, stood on an overturned milk crate, face squinting, lips slightly parted as he muttered to himself through equations written upside down and sideways. The live stream had caught his eye by accident. He wasn't supposed to be on YouTube. The Wi-Fi signal was stolen from a neighbor's unprotected router. But a video titled "Harvard Professor Attempts to Solve 60-Year Math Mystery" had pulled him in like a magnet. Most kids his age would have clicked off at the word proof. Kahlil didn't. He turned the volume low and watched with frozen fascination. Every movement Dr. Merrow made on the chalkboard mirrored in Kahlil's thoughts like a dance. Except Kahlil didn't need the stage. The numbers made sense to him in a way that defied explanation. They weren't just digits and symbols. They were stories, movements, color. Something about the way logic bent under pressure thrilled him. And this equation, this so-called Everest, wasn't terrifying. It was familiar. His fingers, stained with dry erase ink and dirt from his cracked palms, worked fast. Each line he wrote on the board came naturally, as if the equation was guiding him to its own solution. Time seemed to bend. The distant sounds of a TV upstairs, of the neighbor yelling, of Detroit's unrelenting sirens, all faded into a quiet hum. Kahlil's mother, Tanisha, was out working a second shift at a downtown hotel, cleaning banquet halls while wearing a back brace she never mentioned. His older sister, Ashanti, was asleep on the couch upstairs, headphones on, lost in a world she understood better than this one. In that basement, no one saw him. No one applauded. No legacy hung in the air. No spotlight searched for his name. Kahlil didn't even know that what he was doing was impossible. What he did know was that the professor kept stumbling. Merrow circled the same line 3 times, called it non-linear re-entry, then paused to sip water and smile as if even confusion was theatrical. Kahlil furrowed his brow. That step was unnecessary. It created a loop, a trick to stall critics, not solve the proof. He erased his own middle section and reworked it again, using a cleaner approach, one built from instinct and trust and symmetry. Merrow's voice echoed from the small tablet speakers. No high schooler in America could even begin to grasp this. Kahlil paused, marker in midair. His face didn't change. He didn't feel insulted. He just blinked slowly, then continued writing. 6 minutes. That's all it took. 6 minutes later, Kahlil stepped down from the milk crate, stared at the mess of math before him, and tilted his head. Something in him clicked. This wasn't just close. It wasn't partial. It was complete. He wiped his hands on his shorts, the marker squeaking as it fell from his fingers and rolled under a rusted pipe. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just knew. He had solved it.
There were no judges. No speech. No trophy. The world kept turning.
Upstairs, Ashanti shifted in her sleep. A toilet flushed in the apartment above. Somewhere far away, people were still cheering for Dr. Clayton Merrow. Kahlil stood in silence. For a long moment, he simply stared at the board. Then, almost as an afterthought, he took out a cracked cell phone, no SIM card, just Wi-Fi, and snapped a picture of the whiteboard. The flash bounced off the mildew-stained walls. That single image captured not just numbers, but history. The solution to a 6-decade mystery, written in red and blue marker, by a child whose school district had once told his mother he was not suitable for advanced placement. He sat down cross-legged on the concrete floor, the cold biting through his skin. He didn't know what to do next. But in another part of the country, a new headline was already brewing. Journalists would later call it the Detroit disruption. Others would call it mathematical fraud. The world had yet to see what Kahlil had done, but soon they would, and many of them wouldn't like it. As Merrow booms, this is the kind of genius only Ivy League minds can comprehend. Kahlil's cousin texts the whiteboard photo to a friend, and within 10 minutes it goes viral. By the time the sun rose over Detroit's skyline, peeking through grime-covered windows and industrial haze, the photo had already traveled further than anyone in the Darnell household ever had. But inside apartment 2B, on McGraw Avenue, nothing looked different. Kahlil's mother, Tanisha, returned from her overnight shift at the hotel with aching feet and silent exhaustion. Her polyester uniform clung to her like defeat. She peeled it off quietly, not wanting to wake her kids, especially not Kahlil. He was always up too late anyway, lost in notebooks she didn't understand, and websites she didn't trust. She noticed the marker stains on his fingertips when she bent to kiss his forehead. His lips were moving in his sleep, murmuring patterns and primes like lullabies. In truth, Tanisha had known for years. Kahlil wasn't just smart, he was something else entirely. At 3, he could memorize bus schedules. At 5, he rearranged the grocery coupons by cost per ounce. By 7, he was correcting tax form. But brilliance, she had learned, was dangerous when it lived in black skin. It made teachers suspicious. It made neighbors uncomfortable. It made police nervous. So she did what her own mother once did. She told him to keep it quiet. "Don't outsmart grown folk, baby," she'd whisper. "They don't like that." But Kahlil didn't fit in quiet boxes. At school, when the teacher asked for the answer, he didn't just say it. He explained why. He'd use words his instructors didn't understand. They started calling him disruptive. One labeled him aggressively curious. The school psychologist suggested ADHD. Another blamed fatherlessness, despite never meeting the child. Twice, he was suspended for showing off. The books he checked out from the public library disappeared. No one ever saw him reading them, but they always came back annotated with notes in the margins, referencing theorems the librarians had to Google. Still, none of it mattered. The system wasn't built to recognize brilliance in kids like Kahlil, especially not when they wore hand-me-down sneakers and lived near boarded-up gas stations. Back in the basement, the whiteboard sat unchanged. The symbols were still there, dancing with meaning. The solution was real. But who would ever ask for it? It was his older cousin Marquez, who stumbled on the photo that morning. A 24-year-old with oil-streaked hands and a mind full of unfinished dreams. Marquez worked at a garage and slept on the couch some nights. He'd seen Kahlil scribbling the night before and thought it was just another one of his crazy math drawings. On a whim, he snapped a pic and posted it to Reddit with a caption that read, "Lil' cousin solved some Harvard math thing. Said it's called the Vorenstein. I'd ache. Looks smart as hell." He added a laughing emoji, then forgot about it. But Reddit didn't. Within minutes, users in the math and science forums lit up with confusion. Then came the disbelief. Then came the verification. What is this? Wait, this line here, he's redefining the boundary condition. No way, this is real. Who did this? Users started comparing the image to a screenshot of Dr. Merrow's chalkboard. And that's when things went nuclear. By mid-morning, mathematicians in university forums were arguing about Kahlil's method. Someone ran it through software. It held up. Another tried disproving it, live on Twitch. They could. An MIT grad student posted, "Whoever did this just revolutionized how we look at complex field topology." The image got reposted on X, formerly Twitter, then reshared by a major STEM influencer. It racked up 300,000 likes in 6 hours. And still no one knew who Kahlil Darnell was. Tanisha was on her second shift at the airport Marriott when her phone buzzed 19 times in a row. She checked it between rooms. A neighbor had sent her a screenshot. "Ain't this your boy? He famous now?" She blinked. Her stomach twisted. "What is this?" she whispered aloud. Confused, alarmed. At home, Kahlil sat on the floor, watching the screen scroll with likes and reposts. His heart pounded. This wasn't what he wanted. This wasn't part of the plan. He heard the back door open and ran upstairs. "You posted that picture?" he asked Marquise, who was now scrolling through comment sections with his eyes wide. "Bro, you're a celebrity," Marquise said, eyes glowing. "Like real talk, they talking about you on some math website I can't even pronounce." "I didn't want it out there," Kahlil said, voice tight. "I'm not supposed to be seen like that." Marquise looked at him with confusion, then with guilt. "You're brilliant, man," he said. "Let him see it." But Kahlil knew better. He remembered the times teachers called security when he corrected them. He remembered the counselor who asked if he'd been stealing his homework from the internet. Being seen didn't always mean being safe. By nightfall, the post had 11 million views. Major STEM organizations were trying to trace the source. Journalists were trying to contact Marquise. The original Reddit post had been taken down, flagged for controversial content. Some users called it fake. Others said it was stolen. Conspiracy theories bloomed. Someone on Facebook claimed the solution was AI-generated. Another accused Kahlil of plagiarizing a foreign scholar. The photo was dissected, zoomed, analyzed, but none of them could prove it wrong. Still no one, not one outlet reached out to ask about the boy in the photo. They didn't know his name. They didn't ask if he was safe. They only wanted to know where the math came from. And Harvard? Silence. Dr. Merrow's Twitter account remained active. His latest post read, "Always inspired by the brilliance of young minds." The journey to solve the Vorenstein continues. No mention of Kahlil. No acknowledgement of the solution. No admission that a child had beaten him. That night, Kahlil turned off the notifications. He erased the whiteboard. He put away the proof. The world had seen it. That was enough. But as he tried to sleep, he stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something enormous. Not pride, not even fear, just a strange, aching certainty that things would never be the same again. And he was right. In a locked office at Harvard, a junior researcher stares at Kahlil's image and quietly whispers to his colleague, "This isn't a hoax. We need to find him before someone else does." The corridors of Harvard's Department of Mathematical Sciences had grown unusually quiet, not out of peace, but pressure, the kind that comes when an empire senses a storm it didn't see coming. For decades, Dr. Clayton Merrow had been the face of mathematical elegance. Harvard had groomed him. Nobel committees flirted with him. He was a genius with charisma, a rare combination. Every lecture was a performance, every theorem a sonnet, and when he unveiled his partial approach to the Vorenstein conjecture, the university celebrated as though it had landed a second moonshot. But now a storm had breached the ivory walls, and it wasn't coming from Princeton or Oxford. It came from a grainy photo taken in a basement. As news of the solution spread like wildfire, Merrow's social media filled with passive-aggressive skepticism. If this were real, why wasn't it published through proper channels? And looks like another internet hoax. When cornered in a podcast interview, Merrow chuckled, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "I love that people are passionate," he said. "But let's be honest, there's a reason math is done in peer-reviewed journals, not Reddit threads. Some kid claiming to solve Vorenstein is like someone saying they built a rocket in their garage. Charming, but implausible." His tone was diplomatic, but his dismissiveness was intentional. The problem? The kid in the garage had done more than charm the internet. By day 3, the solution had been submitted, anonymously, to an academic review board affiliated with the University of Chicago. No name, just a proof. It was dissected by 5 top researchers, two of whom had published papers attempting the same conjecture. One professor, a leading expert in algebraic topology, reportedly said, "This is cleaner than anything I've seen in 30 years. The board didn't just approve it. They were stunned by it. But the author's identity remained a mystery. The metadata had been wiped. The proof had been uploaded from a masked IP. For all the world knew, it was written by a ghost. Back in Detroit, Kahlil watched the chaos unfold like a stranger peeking through a window. Tanisha refused to let him answer the door. They unplugged the Wi-Fi after an unfamiliar man in a business suit showed up claiming to be from a STEM nonprofit, asking odd questions about intellectual property. It didn't feel right. Nothing did. But curiosity has a way of finding cracks in silence. While Mero publicly downplayed the story, others grew curious and more obsessed. A quiet war emerged online. Twitter threads exploded. STEM communities fractured. One camp hailed the boy in the photo as the next Einstein, revolutionary, raw, unstoppable. The other camp demanded proof of his identity, accusing the photo of being AI-generated, doctored, or worse, a publicity stunt. They fixated not on the solution, but on the audacity of the narrative. A poor black child from Detroit cracked one of the hardest problems in modern math. Show me the catch. Where's his school? His mentor, what's his GPA? He looks 12. The disbelief wasn't about the math. It was about the boy. Mainstream news refused to name him. Major science journals reported on the anonymous solver, but avoided the photo altogether. A well-known network edited his face out of a segment, citing privacy concerns. But when a white teenage coder from Oregon developed an AI app that helped farmers, that same network called him the next Steve Jobs, and ran a feature segment within 40. Kahlil noticed. So did Tanisha. Private institutions, a European academy, a Silicon Valley think tank, even an Ivy League rival, began quietly reaching out, through back channels, with conditions. We'd love to know who your son is, one email said. We can help. But first we need credentials. Another offered $25,000 for access to the foolproof process and video of the child completing it. They wanted his genius, not his name, not his blackness, and not the story that came with it. At Harvard, panic seeped in behind closed doors. Mero's colleagues weren't questioning the proof anymore. They were questioning the future. If someone outside their circle had cracked Vorenstein, what did that mean for their gatekeeping, their prestige, their grant money? A private faculty meeting turned tense. One tenured professor admitted, if this solution checks out, it'll render half of Mero's last decade obsolete. Another added, and if the author's a child, we're going to look like fools. They voted to form a verification and outreach task force. Unofficially, it was called the Cleanup Team. One of its members, a young researcher named Dr. Sloan, had gone silent after seeing the original whiteboard photo. He hadn't been able to stop staring at the handwriting. It was unmistakable, untrained, pure. But what struck him most wasn't the math. It was the angle, the way the board was propped up, the low lighting, the basement pipe in the corner. He recognized the signs.
This wasn't a prank.
This was someone solving an impossible problem under impossible conditions, and they wanted nothing from it. Then, without warning, an envelope arrived at the Darnell apartment. No return address, no postage, just one line on the front in embossed serif letters. Harvard Office of Youth Initiative, Private Academic Observation, Invitation. Inside was a single page. Dear student, we respectfully invite you to a private academic demonstration on the Harvard campus to observe and assess young mathematical thinkers. Attendance is optional. Travel will not be provided. Please come alone.
No signature, no date.
It wasn't sent to the school. It wasn't forwarded through official channels. It came to his door, direct. Tanisha read it twice before folding it in her lap. Her fingers trembled. What is this? She whispered. Kahlil said nothing at first. Then finally, they don't believe it's me. No, Tanisha replied, her voice sharp and tired. They do believe it's you. That's the problem. Outside, a dark sedan rolled past the street slowly, for the third time that day. That night, Kahlil opens his cracked laptop to find a new email, unsigned and chilling. Come alone. Don't bring your mother. We'll be watching. The train ride into Cambridge felt like entering another country. The moment Kahlil stepped onto Harvard's manicured campus, the air changed. Clean, controlled, quietly judgmental. He wore his best jeans and a borrowed collared shirt from Marquise. It didn't help. His backpack, torn at the strap and covered in faded graffiti, drew glances. Not the curious kind, the cautious kind. The kind that signaled he didn't belong. He clutched the mysterious invitation in his pocket like a fragile ticket to another dimension. The wording was still strange, still chilling. Come alone. We'll be watching. No one greeted him at the gate. No one escorted him. Kahlil wandered the stone paths, lined with statues and banners, until he found the building from the email's header, Mendelssohn Hall, home to the Department of Pure Mathematics. Its entrance gleamed like glass-cut order. Inside it smelled of polished wood, old books and money. Students moved with purpose. White, mostly male. Some paused to look at him, then looked away quickly. Not out of malice but out of reflex. A few glanced at his dark skin and backpack and assumed he was lost. A couple of whispered laughs followed him down the hallway. He walked slower, not because he was scared, but because every step echoed louder than it should have. He reached lecture room 3B just before the hour. The room was large, 200 seats, arched rows, and a chalkboard that spanned the entire front wall. At the center stood Dr. Marrow, already in motion, gesturing with his signature flair. The room was full, undergrads, grad students, visiting professors, and donors in the back. No one noticed Kahlil at first. He took a seat in the last row, alone, silent, observing. The board displayed Marrow's current project, an extension of his prior work on curvature theory. Kahlil recognized the sequence from a paper published 6 months earlier. He also recognized 3 fundamental flaws. Marrow clicked his marker twice and said this section is key. It's what defines the spatial divergence. Of course, only those trained in nonlinear symmetry will grasp this. Laughter echoed. Kahlil raised his hand. A brief pause. Heads turned. Marrow looked up, caught off guard. A 12-year-old. He squinted. Recognition flickered. He had seen the boy's face online. The photo, the Reddit thread, the viral chaos, but he'd assumed it was exaggerated, filtered, maybe even manipulated. Still, he recognized him now. Marrow forced a polite smile. Questions will come later, he said with a thin laugh, then turned back to the board. But Kahlil kept his hand raised. The room tensed. One grad student whispered, "Is that him?" Marrow's marker froze. The air changed. Kahlil stood up. He didn't ask permission. He didn't speak. He walked slowly down the aisle, past rows of watching eyes and whispered comments. At the front, he stopped, glanced at the board, then picked up a piece of chalk. Marrow turned fully now. "I don't think this is necessary," he began. Kahlil didn't flinch. He erased 2 sections of Marrow's equation, replaced one with a cleaner curvature substitution, and rerouted the final line using a logical bypass Marrow had deemed impossible in his 20s. The math sang. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't showy. It was flawless. For a second, no one moved. Then came the gasps. Phones rose into the air. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another student whispered, "He's rewriting Marrow." Marrow's eyes narrowed. This is a misinterpretation," he stammered. "He doesn't understand the foundational structure." Kahlil turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "You're using a flawed divergence. It loops back on itself. The sequence invalidates in dimension 5. A stunned silence fell. Marrow's mouth opened, then closed. The boy wasn't wrong. Kahlil added one more line, elegant, precise, and underlined it, then turned back to the room and stepped away from the board. The correction stood tall, untouched, undeniably true. One by one, students began recording. Some murmured. Others stared as if history had just rewritten itself right in front of them. Marrow's hands trembled as he reached for the marker. "This is speculative. This hasn't been peer-reviewed." Someone from the back shouted, "Looks tighter than your whole last paper, Marrow."
A few laughed. A few didn't.
Marrow flushed crimson. "You don't even go here," he snapped, louder than intended. Kahlil looked at him calmly. Neither did the math. Gasps. No one expected defiance. Not from a boy so young. Not from a boy so black. Marrow was cornered, and he knew it. His reputation was built on layers of intellectual dominance, cloaked in civility, but this child had walked into his room, corrected his work, and made it look easy. He couldn't allow it. "Security," he said more softly this time. Kahlil blinked. The door opened. A campus officer stepped in, confused. He's disrupting a private academic session, Marrow said, regaining composure. The officer approached. He's a child, someone muttered. No, he's the kid from the photo, another whispered. Kahlil didn't move. He stood still, eyes level. The officer hesitated. He's not breaking any laws, Marrow snapped. He has no clearance. This is an elite demonstration. Then why did you invite him? The officer asked. The room froze again. Marrow's face paled. Kahlil reached into his pocket and pulled out the invitation. He unfolded it slowly, held it up for the room to see. No one said a word. The officer took a step back. Kahlil gathered his things. The room remained silent as he walked back up the aisle. But this time the whispers carried respect. As he reached the door, Marrow blurted out. He's wrong about the Vorenstein curvature. He didn't prove anything. Kahlil paused at the threshold. Without turning, he said quietly, You didn't either. And then he was gone. But his math remained, burning like a scar across the board, undoing the myth of Marrow one equation at a time. That night, 3 independent professors published anonymous reviews confirming Kahlil's correction, and quietly disproved not 1, but 3 of Marrow's most cited theories. The clip of Kahlil rewriting Marrow's theory hit the internet like a meteor. By midnight, it had been sliced into dozens of edits. Slow-motion zoom-ins, cinematic music overlays, animated diagrams explaining the flaw Kahlil exposed in less than a minute. STEM pages called it a historic correction, while educational forums compared it to the moment Einstein challenged Newton. Students from around the world stitched reactions, some calling him a prodigy, others visibly stunned by his composure and precision. Harvard's official website crashed under the weight of traffic, as users searched for details about the boy who rewrote the board. Emails flooded the mathematics department. News outlets requested statements. Yet, behind Harvard's polished veneer, panic bloomed in sterile conference rooms. There was no plan for this. For the public, it was a celebration. For the establishment, it was a threat. And it didn't take long for that threat to be weaponized. The first shift came subtly. Conservative pundits on late-night television questioned the validity of the footage. One guest smirked. No offense, but we're supposed to believe a child from a public school in Detroit corrected Harvard's top mind. Please. Laughter followed. Another segment aired a blurred version of Kahlil's face next to a graphic that read genius or groomed. By morning, blogs began sprouting with names like STEM Integrity Watch and truthmatters.gov. They didn't address the math. They attacked the idea of Kahlil. One post read, Miraculous Genius or Liberal Plant. The truth about the Detroit Prodigy. Another claimed a leftist agenda was using black children to undermine traditional institutions. The floodgates opened. Memes circulated, showing Kahlil with cheat codes photoshopped in the background. One popular image had him sitting at a laptop with a puppet master controlling him from above. The caption, Every revolution has its scriptwriters. They called him a prop, a tool, a fraud. Tanisha's phone began ringing every hour. Some callers hung up as soon as she answered. Others hissed slurs. One voicemail snarled, Your son's a liar. You better teach him humility before the world teaches it for you. Her hands trembled every time she picked up the receiver. At school, Kahlil was pulled from class. Not for congratulations, but for review. A counselor told him, We just want to understand what's really going on. Teachers started avoiding eye contact. One, who had once failed him on a geometry exam for copying too quickly, now watched him like a threat. A substitute teacher whispered, He should be in a special program, or somewhere else entirely. Even students who once admired him turned wary. You hacked it, right? One boy asked, in the hallway. Come on, a girl nudged him during lunch. You gotta admit someone helped you. Kahlil stopped eating lunch altogether. At home, he stopped speaking for hours. His notebook stayed closed. The board in the basement remained erased. Tanisha sat beside him one evening, brushing his hair softly, pretending not to notice the stiffness in his shoulders. You know what they're afraid of, she whispered. It's not your brain. It's your freedom. You didn't ask them for permission. He looked at her, eyes hollow. They're not mad that I solved it. They're mad that it was me. In a private Zoom call, Marrow met with a circle of elite mathematicians, donors, researchers, and legacy alumni. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rant. But his words were razor sharp. He's a statistical outlier, Marrow said, casually sipping tea. A fascinating anomaly. But let's not pretend one lucky breakthrough threatens the integrity of an institution. We should avoid elevating this child beyond what's reasonable. Another member nodded. The boy's emotionally volatile. He's being politicized. Another added, we should verify the authenticity of the work, independent of his identity. A vote was proposed. Initiate an internal ethics review. Unspoken translation? Investigate the black boy, not for academic misconduct, but for daring to be better than them. 2 days later, an official-looking envelope arrived for Kahlil. It was thicker this time. Formal. To Kahlil Darnell. Subject Academic Ethics Review. Request for attendance. Location Harvard Office of Disciplinary Affairs. Purpose confidential inquiry into claims of authorship, conduct, and professional standards. There was no mention of celebration, no commendation, no invitation to publish or lecture. Just interrogation. Tanisha stood frozen as she read the letter aloud. They think you stole it, she whispered. They think a little black boy from the hood couldn't do it. Kahlil folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. His fingers cold. They're gonna try to erase me, he said flatly. Tanisha looked at him, her eyes watering. Then you better give him a reason to remember you. That night, as the city hummed outside, a new storm was brewing, one no algorithm could explain, one no gatekeeper could stop. But for now the walls of Harvard, prepared to place Kahlil not on a pedestal, but under a microscope. When Kahlil arrives for the inquiry, he finds 5 men in suits, and a 6th chair that's already occupied by someone he never expected. His estranged father. The room felt like it was built to erase warmth. No windows, no color, just white walls, sterile lighting, and a table so polished that every reflection looked distorted. Kahlil sat on one side, small, calm, but vibrating with quiet tension. Across from him 6 white academics sat in a half-circle like judges at a tribunal. Their nameplates gleamed under the lights, each stamped with titles longer than their patients: Dean of Ethics, Chair of Applied Mathematics, Cognitive Research Director. The silence was clinical, unwelcoming. The man in the middle adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Let's begin, he said, voice crisp as frost. For the next 3 hours, Kahlil was questioned not as a prodigy, but as a suspect. How did you learn mathematics at that level without formal instruction? Where did you get access to these materials? Did someone coach you? Do you understand the implications of plagiarism? Each question came like a blade. Careful, rehearsed, designed not to understand him, but to discredit him. They never asked why he solved the equation, only how he possibly could have. One professor leaned forward, folding her hands with mock concern. You must understand, young man, it's unusual for a child from your background to possess this kind of knowledge. What were your grades like in school? Kahlil looked at her evenly. They said I was a distraction. She smiled thinly, jotting something down. Another man, older, spoke with a faint smirk. And what does your father do, Kahlil? The question caught him off guard. His jaw stiffened. I don't know, he said quietly. Ah, the man replied, scribbling a note. That explains something. Tanisha, sitting behind her son in the small gallery section, tightened her fists in her lap. Every muscle in her body ached to intervene. But she knew what they wanted. A reaction. Any reaction. One they could twist into hostility. They were not testing Kahlil's proof. They were testing his presence. The youngest on the panel, Dr. Shaw, tapped the table. Mr. Darnell, you understand how unusual this is. A 12-year-old solving the Vorenstein conjecture. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I already showed it to you, Kahlil said quietly. Yes, the written version. But we'd like to see you recreate it here. Now. From scratch. Tanisha shifted forward. He's a child, she said softly. Dr. Shaw smiled without warmth. Then this should be easy for him. They placed a stack of blank paper in front of Kahlil. A single pencil. No internet. No calculator. Kahlil looked down at the empty sheet. A battlefield disguised as innocence. He took a breath and began. The pencil moved fast. Too fast for them to keep up. Numbers filled the page. Looping. Folding. Connecting. He didn't hesitate once. Each step flowed into the next, like water. No erasures, no second guessing. Occasionally he'd pause, not because he was lost, but because the words to describe the steps didn't exist yet. He was making language out of logic. One of the panelists whispered under his breath. He's actually doing it. After 38 minutes, Kahlil set the pencil down. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air vent. Finished, he said. They stared at the pages, as if staring into something they couldn't name. Dr. Shah leaned forward, skimming the work. His lips parted slightly. The math was clean, flawless. He turned to the others looking for validation, for permission to react. None came.
The chair of the committee finally spoke, tone neutral. We'll need to verify this through our peer channels. Academic protocol, you understand.
So it's correct? Tanisha asked. The chair didn't answer. We need further review, he repeated, standing up. Kahlil blinked. You wanted me to prove it again. I did. Yes, another professor said smoothly. And that's precisely what we'll look into. But as of now, no official conclusion can be drawn. Meaning? Tanisha's voice cracked slightly. Meaning? The chair said, forcing a tight smile. We'll be in touch. The door opened. A security officer gestured for them to leave. The meeting was over. As Kahlil and his mother stepped into the hallway, camera flashes erupted. The corridor outside was lined with reporters, microphones, and phones. Questions hurled like stones. Kahlil, did you cheat? Is Harvard discriminating against you? Did Dr. Marrow mentor you? Tanisha shielded her son and pushed through the crowd, her face pale but fierce. They exited through a side door, escaping into the cold. The night air bit at their skin. No one from Harvard accompanied them out. No car, no escort. They had been summoned, interrogated, and dismissed all in the same breath. At a cafe across the street, a student working the counter recognized them. You're the kid from the video, right? He asked, excited. Man, they should be naming a building after you. Kahlil didn't respond. He stared out the window toward the campus lights flickering across the courtyard. Behind those windows, men who doubted him were already rewriting the narrative. He could almost hear them. We followed procedure. We took it seriously. There was no bias, but he knew better. That night, back home in Detroit, silence hung heavy. The exhaustion in their apartment was palpable. Tanisha sat on the couch, her hands trembling as she reread the committee's vague summary report. No misconduct established. Further verification pending. Pending, she whispered bitterly. That's what they say when they don't want to admit something. Kahlil didn't answer. He sat by the window, sketching shapes in the condensation, his reflection faintly distorted by streetlights. They think I don't belong there, he said finally. Even when I prove I do. Tanisha turned to him, her voice soft but steady. Then we make them see it anyway. For the first time that night, he looked at her. His eyes were sharp, too wise for 12. They don't see, Mama. They decide. Hours later, as the neighborhood fell into uneasy sleep, headlights swept across their front porch. The hum of a spray can broke the silence. Quick, practiced, cruel. By dawn, the words were dry, bold, red. By the end of the week, the spray paint had faded from the front door, but the silence grew louder. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just lack sound. It sucks the air from a room. No more emails, no press follow-up, no interviews, no outrage. The world had scrolled on. Harvard issued no apology, no statement, no acknowledgement that Kahlil had even existed within its halls. They buried him. In the following days, the headlines shifted from Prodigy challenges elite to local lawmaker involved in scandal. From math revolution to Super Bowl halftime controversy. Kahlil's name vanished, deliberately. Media outlets deleted their tweets. Online articles quietly scrubbed his face. A few platforms labeled the video unverified, despite overwhelming evidence. Even in Detroit, neighbors stopped mentioning it. Some assumed it wasn't real. Others were afraid. When the world pretends a miracle never happened, people learn to stop asking questions. Inside apartment 2B, the windows stayed shut, the curtains drawn. Tanisha stopped answering the door. Kahlil, once animated with notebooks and wild ideas, barely touched his pencil. His whiteboard remained blank, not from fear but from fatigue. The erasure was slow, but absolute. And then out of the darkness, someone watched. Someone who remembered. Dr. Cedric Holloway sat in his MIT office, scrolling through archived forums at 3:12 a.m. The glow of his monitor flickered across stacks of research papers. His hair had grayed at the temples, but his mind stayed sharp. He had seen the video the night it went viral. He had saved it, studied it, and when the media buried the story, he didn't forget. Cedric knew the signs. He'd lived them. Back in '91, when he was Kahlil's age, his own teachers refused to recommend him for gifted placement, because he struggled with following instructions. He remembered how it felt to solve problems and be met with doubt, to be a threat in a space designed to deny you. And this silence around Kahlil reeked of institutional design. So he acted. Without permission, without warning, Cedric launched an independent inquiry. He gathered Kahlil's notes from archived screenshots, transcribed his in-class corrections, and cross-referenced the Harvard footage with recent academic publications. The math held up stronger, in fact, than many published solutions. But the story didn't add up. He filed Freedom of Information requests. He dug into Merrow's grants. He found inconsistencies, backroom meetings, leaked documents buried under confidential headers. And that was just the start. Meanwhile, across the country, something unexpected began to stir. At a high school in Oakland, 3 students, 2 girls and a boy, launched a digital petition titled "A Genius Ignored Demand Recognition for Kahlil Darnell." It started with 100 signatures, then 1,000, then TikTok found it. A creator with 5 million followers posted a breakdown of Kahlil's work. "Y'all, this 12-year-old kid solved the impossible, and they're trying to erase him because he's black. Harvard better explain." The video hit 7 million views overnight. Then came the dominoes. Celebrities retweeted it. Activist groups amplified it. Parents, teachers, and students flooded Harvard's official accounts with demands for accountability. The hashtag Justice for Kahlil trended for 3 days straight. One MIT alum wrote, "As a black engineer, I know how easily they dismiss us. This story feels like watching myself disappear again. Not this time." Within 2 weeks, the petition had 1.2 million signatures. Harvard could no longer ignore it. Behind the scenes, the administration scrambled. Private emails revealed panic. Donors threatened to withdraw. Alumni wrote furious letters. One trustee said bluntly in a leaked message, "You need to put this fire out before it burns the entire institution." They tried to spin it. A shallow statement was drafted. "We support diverse voices in STEM and are committed to equitable exploration of all academic contributions." But it landed like a slap. The public wasn't asking for commitment. They were demanding justice. And then, another crack. A small tech site uploaded a leaked audio file. It was grainy, windy, but clear enough. Dr. Clayton Merrow, caught on a hot mic after a private panel at a university gala. He didn't know the microphone was still live. Didn't know the audio would find its way online. "I'm not going to let that kid become the face of American mathematics," he said. "Do you understand how that'll look?" A pause. Laughter from someone nearby. "We've spent decades building this system. One viral moment doesn't get to rewrite it." The audio exploded across the internet like a grenade. Hashtags turned into action. Protesters arrived at Harvard's gates. Students, alumni, parents. The chants echoed across the courtyard. "Say his name. Kahlil Darnell." Merrow issued a statement blaming context, calling it a manipulated snippet. But few bought it. The words were too specific, the intent too clear. Back in Detroit, Tanisha read the transcript over coffee, her hands shaking. "They heard him," she whispered. "They heard what he said." Kahlil looked up from his breakfast for the first time in days. "What happens now?" he asked. Before she could answer, her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a voice she didn't expect. "Ms. Darnell, this is Dr. Cedric Holloway from MIT. I'm calling on behalf of a coalition of professors and educators. We've seen the truth, and we're not going to let them bury your son." As Cedric hangs up the phone, an alert pops up on his computer. His email has been accessed remotely. Files on Kahlil's proof are missing, and a new message flashes across the screen. "You were warned. Back off." Dr. Cedric Holloway stood at the podium like a man unchained. Behind him, the MIT lecture hall brimmed to capacity. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing, fingers poised over keyboards. The room crackled with anticipation, but the air wasn't electric from hope. It was heavy with reckoning. Cedric didn't wear a tie. His blazer was wrinkled. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, not since the email breach, but the fire in his eyes burned clean. "I didn't come here today as a professor," he began, voice steady. "I came here as a product of a system that tried to erase me, and is now trying to erase a boy named Kahlil Darnell." Murmurs swept the audience. He raised a hand. "They'll call this a diversity issue. They'll say we're politicizing math, but let's be honest, this isn't about policy. It's about power." He clicked to the first slide behind him. a chart of standardized test data from the past 20 years, color-coded by district income and race. The disparities were jaw-dropping and intentional. Standardized testing doesn't measure intelligence. It measures access. The richer you are, the more likely you are to succeed. The whiter your zip code, the more likely you are to be seen. The second slide showed a map of national funding for gifted programs. Over 78% of the funding went to schools in predominantly white neighborhoods. In districts like Kahlil's, funding had dropped 34% over the last decade. The third slide. Silence. A screenshot of an internal Harvard email. Subject: Urban Screening Strategy. It's not that they aren't intelligent, but their environment tends to produce behavior that complicates long-term academic investment. Legacy applicants, in contrast, reflect stability values aligned with the Harvard tradition. Gasps erupted. Cedric let it sit. Values, he repeated bitterly. Let's be honest, that word's always been code for whiteness, for control, for comfort. He clicked again. This time, the audience saw a timeline of rejected applicants from predominantly black high schools. Many with exceptional testing scores, published papers, and community accolades. A parallel column showed accepted legacy students with average or below average academic records. All names were anonymized. All outcomes were real. Cedric leaned forward. They say we're playing the race card, he said. But it's their deck, their table, their rules. The room was quiet. Some nodded. Some cried. Then came the final slide. A photo of Kahlil standing in front of a wiped whiteboard, looking tired but unbroken. This isn't just about math. It's about what this country does when a black child outthinks the system designed to break him. It doesn't elevate him. It eliminates him. The applause was thunderous. National media, previously hesitant, now swarmed. CNN picked up the feed within an hour. NBC followed. Hashtags exploded again. Buried brilliance trended globally. Kahlil's name returned to headlines, this time flanked by phrases like systemic bias and the future they tried to erase. But not everyone was clapping. Within 12 hours, conservative pundits fired back. A primetime host on a major network called Cedric's speech intellectual race baiting and accused him of weaponizing victimhood. One guest sneered, "Since when did challenging someone's credentials become racism?" Another host demanded Kahlil undergo a psychological evaluation to confirm he's not being used or manipulated. "He's 12, Cedric retorted in a follow-up interview. 12, and you're asking for psychiatric clearance, not because of behavior, but because of brilliance. The attacks got uglier. Memes reappeared, this time targeting Cedric. Edited photos, misquotes, wild conspiracies, suggesting he was grooming a STEM messiah to destabilize traditional academia. A fake scandal trended for hours before being debunked. And then came the death threats. Cedric's office was vandalized. Spray painted across the door, "Liar." A brick shattered one of his home windows. Campus security offered a guard. Cedric declined. "I'm not hiding," he said. "They're afraid because I stopped whispering." But the truth he unleashed could not be contained. That same week, anonymous hackers, known online as the Null Order, infiltrated Harvard's servers and released over 2,000 internal communications related to admissions, race metrics, and academic policy. The files spread like fire. At first they were dismissed as fabrications, until several email addresses were verified. And the content? Devastating. One thread between admissions officers joked, "Admit one urban genius, and suddenly everyone wants equity. Let's not start a trend." Another exchange debated whether applicants from unstable home environments should be flagged for institutional drain potential. One email asked directly, "What happens if the boy from Detroit actually makes it? Do we have a contingency plan?" Harvard's PR machine collapsed. Resignations came quickly. 2 admissions directors, 1 legacy relations coordinator, a former trustee. Merrow, for his part, remained silent, but his name appeared in over 50 messages, many referencing his desire to control the narrative surrounding the Vorenstein solution. In one damning email he wrote, "If he's black, poor, and 12, it won't last. The machine will correct itself. It always does." America reeled. Some called it the academic version of a whistleblower leak. Others compared it to Snowden. But one thing was now undeniable. America didn't lack black brilliance. It buried it. Systematically. Strategically. Quietly. And Kahlil Darnell had cracked not just a math equation, but the facade of the entire intellectual order.
Back in Detroit, Kahlil watched the coverage unfold like someone watching himself from the outside. His face was everywhere, but no one called to ask how he was sleeping. No one asked how it felt to be simultaneously hailed and hunted.
He sat in the living room with Tanisha, watching a news anchor struggle to say his name correctly. "You okay?" she asked gently. Kahlil nodded, but his voice was low. "I didn't mean for this." She reached over, took his hand. "You didn't start it, baby. You exposed it." Outside, a crowd of neighbors had gathered quietly, not to gawk, but to protect. They stood with signs, candles, and silence, as if their stillness could shield the boy inside from a storm that wouldn't stop. In Boston, Cedric prepared for his next move. He'd been offered interviews, panels, book deals. He turned them down. His focus was singular now. He was building something they couldn't control. Just as Cedric finalizes his blueprint for an independent Black-run research institute, he receives a package, unmarked, hand-delivered. Inside is a single photograph: Kahlil, at a bus stop, alone. The back of the photo reads, "Your move, Professor." "Fraud," painted across their front door. Tanisha freezes when she sees a small card taped beneath the word, the Harvard crest printed at the top, and below it, 6 words in neat handwriting. "We told you we'd be in touch." The air was thick with June warmth, the sun resting heavy over the football field, where rows of white folding chairs faced a stage draped in navy and gold. Preston High's class of seniors sat shoulder to shoulder in caps and gowns, fanning themselves, exchanging glances, waiting for the moment that was supposed to belong to them all. But somehow undeniably now revolved around one: Raina Holloway. Her name had become more than just a student ID, or a name roll call. It had become a symbol, a question, a reckoning, and now finally, it was etched into the valedictorian plaque, engraved beneath the school's banner for all to see. A title they once denied her, one she now held without apology. "Is this really happening?" Mia whispered beside her as the principal, Dr. Lane, approached the podium with a wide smile. Raina gave a soft nod, barely able to breathe. Her name was about to be called, not as a protester, not as a problem, but as Preston High's top student. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Lane began, "today we honor a student who did not just rise to meet the standard, but challenged the very system that defines it." Raina blinked, tears pressing against the backs of her eyes. "A student who reminded us that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. Our 2025 valedictorian, Raina Holloway." The applause was instant and thunderous. Students rose, parents cheered. A few staff members wept quietly. Raina stood slowly, her legs stiff, heart thudding so loud she could barely hear the crowd. The walk to the podium felt endless. Every step carried the weight of every fight, every denial, every night she doubted herself, but refused to back down. And then she was there, behind the mic, facing the crowd, the cameras, and the country watching live. She took a long breath. "I want to start by saying something simple," she began. "Thank you."
The crowd hushed instantly.
"Not just for this moment, but for the ones that came before it. The ones no one clapped for. The ones where I stood alone." She paused, grounding herself. "There was a time not long ago when I didn't believe this day would come. Not because I didn't work for it, but because the road to it wasn't built for someone like me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, cut through the speakers. "I've been called a disruptor, a problem, a threat. But the truth is, I was just tired of being quiet." People leaned forward in their seats. The noise disappeared. For too long, success in schools like ours has depended on silence. On students of color knowing their place. On teachers not asking questions. On systems protecting comfort over fairness. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to say, our voices matter. Raina's eyes scanned the crowd. She saw her mother, hand over her mouth, Malik clapping furiously beside her. She saw Mr. Ellison, standing still, head bowed in humble reflection. I was suspended for telling the truth, and I was told that truth would cost me everything. But here I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I'm not standing here because I was perfect. I'm standing here because I was honest, because I refused to accept invisibility as normal, because I believed that one voice backed by truth could be enough to shake a room built to ignore it. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, speaking now to more than just Preston. Wherever you are, whoever you are, if you've ever been silenced, erased, overlooked, I want you to know, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be chosen to matter. And you don't need permission to speak truth to power. The wind shifted slightly, fluttering the edges of her speech papers. But she didn't need to read anymore. Today I graduate not just from a school, but from a silence I didn't choose. And I leave behind a system a little louder, a little braver, and a lot more honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek. We can't fix everything at once, but we can choose to stop pretending it isn't broken. She stepped back. The crowd rose before she even reached the last word. The applause was no longer polite. It was thunderous, aching, necessary. Even the critics clapped, even the ones who once signed anonymous notes, even the ones who hadn't believed until now. As Raina walked off the stage, heart pounding, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden but as a gift. She reached the end of the ramp, trying to steady herself. That's when she saw it. A man in a gray suit approached her with a quiet nod. He handed her a slim white envelope and disappeared back into the crowd. The front of it bore the seal of the National Civil Rights Education Alliance. Raina opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy parchment, with 3 simple paragraphs. Dear Ms. Holloway, your work in transforming Preston High has reached national attention. Your courage has not only inspired students but has reshaped policy discussions in classrooms across the country. We would like to formally invite you to join our Youth Justice Fellowship in Washington, D.C. This program is awarded to 1 student per year, an advocate who embodies the future of civil rights in education. We believe that student is you. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or erased, this story was for you. Because silence isn't neutral, and justice doesn't come by waiting. It comes when someone dares to speak, even when their voice shakes. Type yes if you believe one voice can change everything. Subscribe if Raina's fight broke your heart, but gave you hope. The leak hit like an unannounced thunderstorm. At first it was a trickle, an email here, a private message there. Then suddenly the floodwaters rose, washing away the institution's polished facade. Inside the secure servers of the Harvard University Mathematics Department sat dozens of internal communications, now exposed to the world. For the first time, what had always been whispered in hallways and conference rooms was on full display. The contempt, the fear, the resentment directed toward a boy who simply solved a long-standing problem. The first email that circulated widely was titled Future Threats Urban IQ Anomaly, sent by a tenured professor to 2 colleagues. The body read in part, if this kid gets tenure track by 18, or obsolete. We built this system for a reason. Let's not let a one-offs kid destroy decades of investment. Within minutes, it was public. Screenshots multiplied. Fingers pointed. Senate subcommittees were alerted. Harvard's president found himself answering questions on national news about emails he hadn't seen. Donors called. Alumni redirected contributions. Students marched across campus chanting his name, Kahlil Darnell. The second email, from a senior admissions officer, detailed strategy under a subject line labeled Detroit Case Study, Avoidance Measures. It read, send him back to Detroit with a calculator and say we tried. Legacy and proximity budgets already show strain. That phrase, send him back to Detroit with a calculator, circled the web like bile. For many it was the smoking gun. The racism wasn't hidden under elegant language. It was laid bare. The damage was measured in seconds. In faculty lounges around Cambridge, professors walked quietly through hallways. Some carried laptops with the emails open on screen. Others looked at colleagues differently. Trust fracture. A senior mathematician approached Cesar Alvarez, a junior faculty member, and muttered, they should shut him down before he becomes a spectacle. Cesar's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The email threads made his silence feel complicit. Media outlets picked up the story rapidly. One headline read, Elite Universities' emails expose bias against child prodigy. Another said, could Harvard be terminally wounded by its own hubris? The narrative shifted dramatically. This wasn't just about a 12-year-old genius anymore. It was about the nature of privilege, gatekeeping, and the institutions built to exclude. But again, Kahlil remained quiet. He didn't read the headlines. He didn't answer the calls from journalists. What he cared about was the whiteboard in his basement. Still blank, still waiting. He cared about the books stacked on his desk, untouched. He cared about proving mathematics, not proving a point. Tanisha watched the turmoil with hollowed exhaustion. The Darnell home had become a pressure cooker. At school, Kahlil avoided the cafeteria. His classmates sometimes gave him nods of respect. But many avoided him too, afraid that his presence brought attention, and attention brought trouble. At night, she heard him awake in the dark, rethinking symbols, reimagining shapes. She didn't know if it was insomnia or determination. She didn't tell him it wasn't fair. All she whispered was, "You deserve this. They don't." Back at Harvard, the response was chaotic. Senior leadership ordered an all-hands meeting. Legal teams met behind closed doors. The word apology was floated, but never used. Instead, a press statement appeared. Harvard remains committed to academic excellence and equitable access for all students. It came off as hollow. A high-ranking alumni group launched its own investigation. Resignations followed. One admissions director, one development officer, and quietly, a vice provost for student affairs. The institution trembled under the weight of its own emails. Meanwhile, the world tried to whiten the chaos. Hollywood agents reached out to Tanisha. "We'd like to option his story," they said. A staffer from the White House called, asking if the boy would speak at an upcoming STEM summit. For Kahlil, all of it felt surreal. Fame and recognition were not his goals. Learning was. He wasn't sure how to respond to invitations he didn't ask for. Instead, he returned to the chalkboard, erased everything he'd once written, and began again. And then came the twist no one saw coming. Late one evening, Tanisha opened the front door to retrieve the mail. A man stood on the porch, neat brown suit, polished shoes, calm expression. Behind him a folder in his hands, marked with a Swiss emblem she didn't recognize. He introduced himself as a recruiter from Switzerland's top research lab, Lab X. He said quietly, "We've been watching your son. We'd like to fly him to Geneva, see what he does." Tanisha's breath caught. Kahlil, standing behind her, stared silently at the man. The room changed. What had been defensiveness, tiredness, fear suddenly felt like possibility, but also danger. Leaving Detroit meant stepping into another system, one that might be kinder, or one that might keep score differently. That night the recruiter left without a goodbye. The folder remained on the porch. Kahlil didn't touch it. He studied the Swiss crest and thought, "What do they see when they look at me?" The apartment was quiet after the door shut. Tanisha sat beside her son in the living room. The street lamps outside cast long shadows through the blinds. Kahlil turned to her and said softly, "Mama, what if this is just another way they try to own me?" She reached for his hand. "Then we make sure they don't." Outside, the city hummed, oblivious. But inside the Darnell home, a decision loomed. As Kahlil drifts to sleep, his phone lights up with a message from Geneva. Boarding pass attached. Flight leaves in 60 hours. Attached, a digital ticket. First class. Departing from JFK to Geneva. Kahlil Darnell. Your seat is reserved. Flight LX 2110. Boarding in 60 hours. Full tuition. Secure housing. Private research lab access. No visa required. Your brilliance is the only credential we need. The email didn't ask for a yes or no. It simply stated facts. Tanisha stared at the screen with her hand over her mouth. She'd read it twice, then a third time. Still, she didn't speak. In the silence, Kahlil watched her from across the kitchen table, waiting. He didn't say what he was feeling, but it hung thick in the air. A strange blend of relief and guilt, hope and dread. Geneva offered peace, escape, but also the painful confession that the country of his birth, the nation that promised opportunity, had become his executioner in reputation, in safety, in possibility. The offer came with no strings, no tests, no interviews, just an open door. A place where intellect wasn't filtered through race, neighborhood, or family income. And still Tanisha hesitated. Kahlil nodded, but he wasn't sure which one applied. In Detroit he was a target. In Cambridge, he was a problem. And in Geneva, he'd be an experiment. Even if coined, even if well-funded, he'd still be the American black prodigy. He couldn't tell if that label was any better than the slurs. "I don't want you leaving just to be safe," she said, finally breaking the silence. "You should leave to be free. There's a difference." The next morning, news broke. State officials in Michigan released a statement claiming Kahlil had been exposed to destabilizing political influence and hinted that foreign agencies may be attempting to exploit his intellect. The dog whistle wasn't even subtle. One official said on record, "We have reason to believe this child is being radicalized under the guise of mathematics." It's in everyone's best interest to pause and assess. Effective immediately, Kahlil Darnell will be placed on academic leave to ensure a safe and stable learning environment for all students. Hours later, Kahlil's school suspended him for his own safety. No classes. No goodbye. Just a sterile email. Outside the school, chaos replaced silence. Protesters gathered. Two kinds. One side chanted. In the official statement, the district claimed no wrongdoing, but cited public pressure and recent threats. Protect Black brilliance. Justice for Kahlil. Let the boy learn. The other side, angrier, older and louder, held signs reading, "Fraud, not genius. Keep politics out of schools. He's not special." Local news aired both sides, editing the footage to suggest community division. Kahlil didn't go outside. One morning, while Tanisha brewed coffee, and Kahlil buried himself in equations, Ashanti slipped outside to fetch the morning paper. He watched the coverage with his sister, Ashanti, curled up beside him. She was only 8, quiet, observant. She didn't say much about what happened, but she knew what it meant when the front windows were covered with poster board, when their mailbox was broken, and when their mother stayed up all night. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. "There's something on the ground," she whispered. "It looks like rope." She walked back in slowly, quietly, and tapped her mother's arm. They rushed outside. Drawn in chalk, just beyond the front steps, was a noose. A perfect, deliberate circle, with the tail stretched toward the street, as if someone had studied it, practiced it, planned it. Next to it in the same chalk, Tanisha dropped the coffee mug. The shatter pierced the silence. "Go." Ashanti clung to her mother's leg. Kahlil stood frozen, eyes locked on the image, face unreadable. He didn't cry, he didn't look away, but something inside him broke, and never returned. Just vandalism. By noon, the front yard was roped off with police tape. An officer filed a report with no urgency. "It's not an active threat," he said. "Just vandalism." The next day, she called the number on the Geneva folder. She whispered aloud, more to herself than to anyone else. What kind of country needs a chalk noose to admit it doesn't want you? That night, Tanisha sat at the kitchen table long after Kahlil went to bed. She stared at the flight confirmation still open on her phone. A pause. Tanisha asked one question. "Will he be safe?" A woman answered with a thick French accent. "Yes, Miss Darnell. We are ready. Whenever you are." That night, Tanisha woke Kahlil gently. Then, "With us?" "Yes. But more than that, he will be free." "It's time," she said. At JFK, the TSA officer looked at Kahlil twice, once with curiosity, then with recognition. His eyes narrowed. They packed light. No press announcement. No goodbye tour. Just a ride to the airport in a rented sedan, and a suitcase full of notebooks, chalk, and his sister's drawing tucked in the side pocket. Kahlil opened his eyes, slowly. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. The officer didn't smile. "Well," he muttered, waving him through, "don't make us look stupid out there." "You're that kid, huh?" he said. Kahlil nodded cautiously. Kahlil didn't respond. Tanisha turned to him. "I'm not sending you away," she said. "I'm sending you forward." In the departure terminal, they sat by the window, watching planes rise and fall. He took her hand and whispered, "You're coming with me, right?" The final boarding call echoed through the terminal. She nodded, holding back tears. "Always." They stood. One last look at the gate. One last breath of American air. As they approached the boarding lane, a stranger brushed past them. A white man in a Harvard hoodie. He didn't look at Kahlil, but he dropped a piece of paper into his backpack without a word. Later at 30,000 feet, Kahlil opened it. One sentence. Handwritten. "No matter where you land, we're still watching." Back in Detroit, while their plane soars toward Europe, a federal surveillance warrant is quietly filed on Kahlil's name, approved by a judge in under 7 minutes. The boarding gate was supposed to be the final threshold, a line that once crossed, meant escape. But for Kahlil Darnell, it became one more interrogation room, just without the walls. TSA agents flagged him moments after he handed over his passport. The agent didn't flinch, didn't offer a smile, just stared at the name for a beat too long before tapping a button on his radio. Within minutes, 2 more agents flanked him. "We need him for additional screening," one said. Tanisha stepped forward. "Excuse me, he's 12. Ma'am, please stand back." They led Kahlil down a side corridor. Not roughly, but not gently either. the kind of handling reserved for someone marked, not dangerous but disruptive. In the sterile back room, Kahlil sat on a metal bench. His backpack was emptied. Every pencil, every notebook, every scrap of paper pulled apart like it could detonate. One agent flipped through his math notes with latex gloves, pausing at complex formulas as if trying to decipher a thread in the numbers. Tanisha wasn't allowed in. She waited outside, pacing the tile until her legs ached. Inside, Kahlil was fingerprinted. "What's this for?" he asked quietly. "National security," the agent replied, eyes never lifting. 2 hours passed. The flight's final boarding call echoed faintly down the corridor. The pressure in Tanisha's chest grew unbearable. Finally, after making 6 calls, none answered. She banged on the security door until someone opened it. "My son is not a criminal," she said, voice cracking. "He's a child," the officer replied coldly. "He's a flagged traveler under an active surveillance review. We're just following procedure." By the time they were released, the crowd at the gate had thinned. Flight attendants hurried them on board. With practiced politeness, no one explained anything. No one apologized. Kahlil took his seat near the window, his hands still trembling. His silence was louder than any outcry. News broke mid-flight. A nearby passenger had filmed the entire incident, uploaded it to Twitter with the caption, "12-year-old black math genius detained by TSA. What threat was he carrying? Algebra." The video went viral before they even left U.S. airspace. By the time they landed in Geneva, protest had already reignited in New York. In Chicago, hashtags returned. "Let Kahlil learn" trended again. Commentators debated whether this was a simple mistake or another act of profiling, wrapped in procedure. But in Switzerland, the air was different. Cold, crisp, clean in a way that felt almost unreal. And for the first time in months, Kahlil's name wasn't spoken with suspicion. It was spoken with awe. As he descended the plane's steps, a small group stood waiting at the tarmac. Professors, lab staff, students, and 3 children holding a banner that read, "Bienvenue Kahlil. The future begins with you." The applause started softly, then grew louder. Strangers cried. Not because they understood everything he'd solved, but because they understood what had been done to him, and what it meant that he was still standing. In Geneva, he wasn't treated like a myth or a liability. He wasn't the black genius from Detroit. He was Kahlil, student, thinker, builder. His room overlooked a lake. The lab gave him unrestricted access to the most advanced mathematical AI systems in Europe. His mother was given a stipend and private counseling. Ashanti was enrolled in a French-language arts academy within days. No lectures, no cameras, just. And yet as Kahlil stared at the silver floors and whiteboards the size of garage doors, he couldn't help but wonder, was this opportunity or exile? Back home, the headlines took another sharp turn. Dr. Clayton Merrow re-emerged. After months in silence, he launched a press tour for his new book, Guiding Genius: How Mentorship Unlocks the Next Einstein. The cover featured a blackboard with blurred math scribbles and a silhouette of a small child holding a pencil. In his interview with a major network, Merrow sat poised, confident, and deliberate. "I've always believed in nurturing young minds," he said. "Kahlil was exceptional. But without the structure we provided, who knows where that mind might have wandered." The host blinked. "Wait, are you saying you mentored him?" Merrow nodded solemnly. "Well, indirectly, yes. My lectures reached him. My theories were the soil in which his thinking grew. We may not have met one-on-one, but his genius was shaped within the framework I built." The implication was clear. He was taking credit. In Geneva, Kahlil saw the clip on a loop. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He just closed his laptop and walked outside to the edge of the lake, letting the cold wind sting his skin until it reminded him that he was real, that his work was real, that no one could revise the truth, unless he stayed silent. Later that night he wrote one line in his notebook. "Even the soil can lie about who planted the seed." As reporters dig deeper into Merrow's book claims, an anonymous source leaks a sealed Harvard file, labeled Subject Darnell, Containment Strategy Draft 3. Inside is a sentence that changes everything. "If denial fails, absorb the narrative." In the months that followed his relocation to Geneva, Kahlil watched his story fracture, not from distance but from design. Merrow's book, Guiding Genius, debuted at number 2 on the national bestsellers list. With a marketing machine behind it, the media picked up the narrative like gospel, Feature after feature painted the disgraced professor not as a manipulator, but as a misunderstood architect of brilliance, a man ahead of his time, whose indirect influence had lit a fire in an unknown boy from Detroit. "We may not have shaken hands," Merrow said in a highly viewed TED Talk, "but through the power of accessible education, I planted the idea that would awaken the genius within him." The applause thundered. Mainstream journalists didn't question it. They leaned in. Outlets that once ignored Kahlil now ran softened features with titles like "The Unexpected Mentor Behind America's Youngest Mathematical Mind" and "Dr. Merrow's Redemption," turning controversy into conversation. Only a few independent voices pushed back. Where's the evidence he mentored this boy? Did he ever contact Kahlil? Why is Kahlil not speaking? But those questions were buried beneath the noise of well-lit interviews, polished op-eds, and best-selling lists. A quiet revision began. In 2 major high school textbooks, Kahlil's name was mentioned briefly in a sidebar. Young student inspired by Merrow's teachings, solves key equation in another he wasn't mentioned at all. The proof was credited vaguely to the Merrow method, a new academic term coined in one of the professor's licensing packages for school districts. In Geneva, Kahlil read it all. Every article. Every edit. He said nothing. He didn't tweet. He didn't grant interviews. When reporters called the research institute, he politely declined with the same sentence. "I'm building something better." And he was. Each night after classes, Kahlil stayed in the lab late, sketching code with the same fluidity he once used on equations. But this time, it wasn't a theorem he chased. It was access. What if no child needed to be discovered? What if they could discover themselves? The project started as an idea: build a learning platform that combined AI with adaptive teaching logic to deliver high-level STEM education to marginalized students, completely free. No tests, no logins, just brilliance unlocked. He called it ORIA, short for Open Resource for Advancement. With help from his professors, ORIA used machine learning to adjust to how kids thought, not just what they got right. It wasn't gamified or flashy. It was raw, elegant, and human. And it didn't just teach, it listened. Within weeks of its soft release, a dozen schools in Senegal, Southside Chicago, and parts of rural Alabama began integrating ORIA into after-school programs. Teachers were stunned. Students who once struggled began solving calculus-level problems in weeks, not because they were taught differently, but because for once they were believed in. The reviews were breathtaking. "This is more than an app. It's an equalizer. Kahlil just gave kids a seat at a table they were never invited to. I've never seen anything like this. It teaches like it knows you." And then, silence. One by one, public schools started pulling the tool. No announcements, no emails, just quiet removal. In Baltimore, an administrator claimed the system could not be verified under state data compliance. In rural Georgia, ORA was blocked by firewalls due to its non-certified foreign software origin. In Texas, teachers were warned against using it due to curriculum misalignment concerns. Then in the Midwest, a principal sent Kahlil's team a private message. "We were told this was an unsanctioned system built by controversial figures. The district ordered us to remove it within 24 hours. No explanation given." Kahlil's face tightened when he read that line. Not angry, not shocked, just knowing. Even at 12 he understood. They weren't banning a program. They were banning what it represented. The idea that a child, born outside their institutions, could build something better than what their systems had offered for decades terrified them. Especially if that child didn't need them to translate his genius into marketable, palatable, white-approved brilliance. So they erased again. Tanisha watched her son code late into the night, with quiet admiration. In his silence, she saw strength, but also a sadness that he didn't name. "Are you okay?" she asked him once. "I'm just tired of fixing the world before I get to live in it," he said softly. Still he worked. ORA grew. Where it was banned, it went underground. Teenagers created mirror sites. Hacker collectives disguised the platform as a calculator app. In 1 week, 1,000 students in Brazil used Aura to build real-time flood prediction models. In another, kids in the Bronx cracked a problem in protein folding, usually reserved for PhDs. One student in Nairobi sent Kahlil a voice message. "They told me I wasn't gifted, but you built this, so now I know I am." And yet in the US, school boards and politicians continued the silent siege. A federal education task force called the app potentially disruptive to long-term curricular standardization. A conservative lawmaker posted, We don't need foreign-trained miners building AIs that indoctrinate our kids under the guise of math help. Back in Geneva, Kahlil kept his head down. He didn't answer the lies. He didn't tweet receipts. He built, with something in the silence gnawed at him. Not just the erasure, but the rewriting. Mero's story was now being taught in classrooms he would never visit. His ideas were being sold under someone else's name. And every day that he stayed quiet, the lie grew louder. One evening, he stood at the top of a hill, overlooking Lake Geneva. Snow dusted the horizon. The air was thin, clean. Tanisha joined him, hands buried deep in her coat. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. Kahlil stared at the water. "Only if I get to write the ending." That night, a breaking news alert flashes across Kahlil's screen. A group of schools in California have labeled Aura as a national security risk and reported the platform to Homeland Security. The second time, he didn't blink. When it ended, he sat in silence. Tanisha was in the kitchen. Ashanti was drawing. He whispered, "They're everywhere." And he meant it. Those like him. Those they tried to bury. Then came the message. Encrypted. Sent through a private server re-rated across 4 countries. Subject line. "The unseen are watching." It was signed by names Kahlil didn't recognize. Not publicly. But when he searched them, the pattern revealed itself. Former prodigies. Now engineers. Professors. Some in the shadows. Others deliberately forgotten. One message read, "They left us isolated on purpose. Told us we were anomalies. That we were lucky to be allowed near the table. But we've been watching you, Kahlil. And we're done watching." Another followed. "It's time to stop surviving and start building. Not for them, for us." They offered no funding. No institution. No type. What they offered was rarer. Belonging. One name stood out. Dr. Ayanna Moore. A mathematician once called the black female Newton. She'd vanished from academia after blowing the whistle on racially biased IQ testing used in Ivy League admissions. For 25 years, she'd been offline. Now she wrote, "We've each been told we were alone. You proved we weren't. If you're ready, we want to build the first thing they've never allowed, a science institute run by us, for those they never let in." Kahlil didn't respond immediately. He walked to the window. Snow touched the glass lightly. Across the lake, lights blinked like signals from a future just out of reach. Tanisha joined him. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the message. She read it slowly, then turned to her son. "What are you going to do?" Kahlil's voice was quiet. "I'm going to stop proving I belong." He looked at the screen again. "And start proving we never needed their permission." The next morning, Kahlil logs in to Aura to begin the first draft of the new collective's blueprint. But instead of the dashboard, a black screen flashes with one sentence: "This tool now belongs to the United States government." The day Aura was seized, Kahlil didn't scream. He didn't cry. He stared at the screen, black, unresponsive, with one cold line of text. "This tool now belongs to the United States government." His hands hovered above the keyboard, frozen. They'd taken everything before. His name, his country, his peace. But this was different. Aura wasn't just a platform. It was proof that they didn't own genius. That brilliance could be decentralized, democratized, unleashed. And now, it was gone. But not lost. Because Kahlil had already anticipated the breach. Weeks earlier, before the bans began, before the accusations, he had cloned Aura's root architecture into a private server, rerouting it through a global mesh of encrypted IPs. The clone wasn't active. Not yet. He'd been saving it for something bigger. Now he was ready. In Geneva, beneath the veil of frostbitten winter skies, Kahlil activated a new file directory named Diaspora Lab. The vision, not just a digital platform, but a physical place. A sovereign international science institute, created by the ignored, for the ignored. No entry exams, no age limits, no GPA thresholds, just brilliant. And it started with one call. Dr. Ayanna Moore. "Ghana. I've waited 23 years for this moment," she said, her voice sharp but warm. "Let's build the school they told us didn't need to exist." The next was a physicist from Trinidad, then a former NASA engineer turned whistleblower, a neurobiologist in Morocco, a blind AI coder from Mississippi, a coder turned activist in Soweto. One by one, the silenced came forward, not for vengeance but for rebirth. Within 3 weeks, Kahlil's quiet Geneva lab, transformed into a coordination hub for an unprecedented alliance. Anonymous donors from black tech collectives poured in funding. Crowdfunding campaigns exploded with support. Celebrities shared encrypted donation portals. Anonymous Bitcoin whales dropped six-figure sums, with a single line in the ledger. No more waiting. They called it the Freeman Institute. Named not just for freedom, but for those never freed from silence. It launched with 6 campuses across the globe: Accra, Chicago, Johannesburg, São Paulo, Kingston, and Oakland. Each site outfitted with reclaimed warehouses, abandoned school buildings, even repurposed churches. What they lacked in polish they made up for in soul. No bells, no grades, no standardized tests. Students were simply called builders. They didn't memorize equations. They challenged them. They didn't raise hands to speak. They built problems together. Sideways, backward, upward. They reimagined, not just the world, but the frameworks meant to contain it. A 10-year-old girl from Nigeria used solar sensors to grow salt-resistant crops. A boy from Atlanta reverse-engineered a 3D-printed artificial limb with scrap metal. In Brazil, 2 siblings mapped an entirely new language using color-coded pulse patterns. Brilliance wasn't the exception. It was the baseline. And for the first time in history, it wasn't filtered through whiteness, wealth, or Western vetting. It wasn't owned. Kahlil didn't appear on any official board. He declined the title of founder. He simply called himself custodian. But as the Freeman Institute grew, so did the noise from the other side. The U.S. Department of Education declared the institute non-accredited. No formal degrees, no transfer credits, no government loan. A senator on live TV called it intellectual anarchy. Another host on a major network sneered. We finally have segregation again, just in lab coats. The institute wasn't sanctioned by any nation. It wasn't tethered to traditional regulation. And that made it dangerous. Even as student breakthroughs made headlines, curing rare diseases, building microgrids in underserved villages, politicians in the U.S. doubled down. Federal funding was blocked for any school associated with Freeman researchers. Districts received warnings not to endorse any of its materials. The institute was branded a separatist enterprise, and more dangerously, unpatriotic. And somewhere, in the halls no camera could enter, intelligence agencies quietly opened new files. Keywords: Kahlil Darnell, Freeman, decentralized, uprising. Still, they couldn't stop it, because the Freeman Institute had no single location. It was cloud-bound, student-built, adaptive. It wasn't centralized. It was seeded. And it was thriving. Until Berlin. The conference was supposed to be historic. Kahlil was scheduled to deliver the opening keynote at the Global Youth Summit on scientific equity. Delegates flew in from 80 countries. It was his first major public appearance since Geneva. He wore a charcoal blazer and his sister's hand-painted shoes. As he stepped onto the stage, the room rose. Not just in admiration, but in reverence. The boy they tried to bury had become the symbol of what couldn't be silenced. He approached the podium, adjusted the mic. But before he could speak, his knees buckled. Gasps echoed. He collapsed forward. Staff rushed in. Doctors on standby moved fast. The crowd was cleared. Cameras turned off. By nightfall, rumors spread. Dehydration, stress, exhaustion. But the doctors said otherwise. He didn't faint, one whispered. His vitals were wrong. Within hours, toxicology tests were ordered. 2 markers raised red flags, neuroagents typically associated with slow-acting poisons. This wasn't natural, the attending physician said quietly. Not a single word appeared in the press. Kahlil remained unconscious in a secure Berlin hospital. Tanisha flew in the next morning. She stood over his bed, eyes rimmed red but unbroken. She whispered, "They still can't handle your brilliance. But I swear, baby, they'll never kill your light." As she holds his hand, a nurse slips a note into her palm, trembling. On it, one line is scribbled. They tried this before, 1983. Ayanna Moore. She survived too. The news broke at 7:42 a.m. Berlin time. Confirmed poisoning and attempted assassination of Kahlil Darnell. It wasn't a conspiracy theory anymore. The tests had returned from a private independent lab in Zurich. 2 compounds, both illegal, both synthetic, were found in Kahlil's bloodstream. Designed to mimic exhaustion and collapse, but in high enough doses, they would have shut down his nervous system entirely. The poison had been administered through a skin contact agent. most likely on a microphone, a handrail, a glass. Silence fell across the science world. Then fury. Within hours, protest ignited on 3 continents. In Atlanta, high school students marched from their classrooms to the state capitol, holding signs that read, "You can't kill brilliance," and "Let black minds breathe." In Ghana, university students held vigils, lighting candles and chanting Kahlil's name. In South Africa, streets were blocked, not by activists, but by educators, thousands of them refusing to teach until justice was addressed. Geneva's streets filled with protesters holding placards that said "Ora forever," custodians, not colonies, and they tried to kill the proof. At the Freeman Institute's 6 campuses, enrollment tripled in 1 week. Donors who once hesitated now wrote checks in silence. Tech giants who had remained neutral scrambled to backtrack. Black scientists who had stayed underground came forward, ready to teach, ready to build, no longer afraid. Kahlil's hospital room became sacred ground. He remained unconscious for 3 days. On the 4th, his eyes opened. He whispered first to his mother. "Did they win?" Tanisha leaned in, tears in her eyes. "You're still breathing." "They lost." The recovery was slow. He could barely lift a pen at first. His speech slurred, his eyes blurred after more than a few minutes of reading. But his mind remained untouched. His thoughts raced ahead of his body. Doctors were stunned. A child who should have lost fine motor skills was sketching math patterns in the air, with his fingers within a week. And not just patterns, proofs, equations, design. In the media, the narrative had shifted again. No longer was Kahlil the controversial prodigy. He had become the martyr who lived. Statues were proposed in Detroit. A street near his old elementary school was renamed Darnell Way. A former federal judge called for a national holiday in his honor. Journalists who had once questioned him now hailed him as a once-in-a-century intellect. But Kahlil remained quiet. He didn't speak in interviews. He didn't attend rallies. His first public appearance came 2 months later, at a Freeman Institute satellite lab in Accra. He was wheeled onto a stage. The audience rose before he could say a word. When the room finally quieted, he leaned toward the mic, still pale, still weak. "I didn't survive because I'm a genius," he said. "I survived because the truth is harder to kill than the body carrying it." Applause erupted. He continued. "They didn't fear me. They feared what I proved, that brilliance is not rare, opportunity is." The speech was broadcast globally. That line became gospel. Brilliance is not rare. Opportunity is. It appeared on murals, on classroom walls, on scholarship applications, even laser engraved into glass doors at public libraries in 3 cities. But one name vanished. Dr. Clayton Merrow. After the Freeman Institute's rise and the exposure of the containment strategy memo, Merrow disappeared from public life. His publisher pulled his book from shelves. Harvard distanced itself with a carefully crafted statement of academic neutrality. Rumors circulated, a resignation, a private settlement. Some said he fled to a private villa in Europe. Others claimed he never left Massachusetts, just changed his name. But no one could say for sure, because he no longer mattered. Kahlil never mentioned him again. Instead, he focused on rebuilding Aura, this time embedded within the Freeman Institute, now open-sourced, distributed, and no longer attached to his name. It was a gift, he said, not a brand. He refused any commercial offers. When a tech firm offered him $12 million to integrate Aura into their learning division, he declined with one sentence: "It was never meant to be owned." Still, his work spoke louder than the offers. Within a year, the Freeman Institute had launched 15 microcampuses globally. Hundreds of students were building prototypes in AI, physics, medicine, and sustainable tech. None had grades, all had breakthroughs, and Kahlil, still recovering, began teaching. Not in lecture halls, but on the floor, on rooftops, in converted classrooms with nothing but a chalkboard and fierce minds. He taught the same way he learned, out of bounds. Tanisha, now an advisor at the Geneva campus, often watched him from a distance. She no longer feared for him. She feared for the world that still tried to cage boys like him. But then one morning, everything changed again. A nurse entered Kahlil's hospital recovery suite in Berlin with a sealed envelope. No return address, no stamp, just his name. Inside was a single page. On it, an equation, unlabeled, uncredited, handwritten in a style eerily familiar to him. It was complex, denser than anything he'd seen, even in grad-level material. His eyes traced it 3 times, By the fourth, his fingers were moving again. There was a challenge in the structure, a message in the math. And then he noticed something chilling. In the corner, a tiny symbol was sketched, a signature from one of the discarded documents leaked in the Harvard memo dump, a symbol from a once secret think tank inside the US government's defense research branch. This wasn't just math, it was bait. Tanisha entered the room minutes later and found him staring at the page. "What is it?" she asked. Kahlil looked up, a flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not fear, not excitement, something deeper. "It's a door," he said quietly. "To where?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think they want me to walk through it." As Kahlil folds the paper, the lights in his room flicker. His laptop pings with a notification from an unknown encrypted server. Your next problem isn't numbers, it's truth. If you've ever been told you don't belong, just for being who you are, then you already know Kahlil's story isn't rare. It's just finally being seen. Type yes if you believe brilliance should never be silenced, and subscribe if this broke your heart.